All right, let's get into the CSS bits now. Let's start to style our application a little bit. Right now, what does it look like? It looks something like this. It's slightly ugly. These are not positioned well. The button styles aren't right. Overall, it looks like a pretty ugly website. What do we want to convert it by the end of this specific section? We want to convert it to something like this. Looks much cleaner. There's some padding here, space in the middle, buttons are right. This button has a color, all these things. How do you achieve this? From this is what we will learn, and what all CSS jargon and knowledge you need to know for that. Okay? Let's get right into it. Let's get into the CSS bits. What does CSS let you do? Now, CSS is the second language that we're discussing after HTML. It lets you add styles to your website, which means colors, font sizes, background colors, things like these. What does that mean? That means if you look at this slide.com, this is also a website, right? You can see this has a color behind it. This has a black color here. This has a white color here. The text is white here. This is a big text. This is a small text. All of these are done inside my browser. And the only way to style inside your browser is using CSS, which basically means this page, the fact that it looks so pretty and has a background color here, has like a dotted line here, is all done through CSS. That's one thing that CSS lets you do. What is the second big thing that CSS lets you do? It lets you position things on the page. What does that mean? If you look at this page, this thing is at the top left. This whole nav bar takes like some left section is stacked to the left. There is something right next to it, which is stacked to the left. This is in the middle of the screen. This is on the top right of the screen. This is in the middle right of the screen. This is the bottom right of the screen. How do you position divs, spans, texts across your page is another thing that CSS lets you do. And we will understand how we do it there. Why do we need it for our website? If you go back to the Zerodha page, this thing is on the left. This thing is on the right. How do you position elements left, right, bottom, center, all these things using CSS is what we'll learn next. Okay? These are the two big use cases of CSS. There are a bunch of other use cases. Common ones are styling your page, positioning elements on your page. How do you add styles? This is the simplest thing to understand. How do you make the font color a certain color? How do you add a background black to your div? Simple stuff. If this is your original h1 tag, let's say, that has a heading. If I write this h1 tag, this is what it looks like in the browser. If I want to change the color of this header or add a background color to this div, how can I do it? The answer is this. With h1, I'll add a new style attribute where I will say color is red and background is green. If I do this, just this syntax converts my simple header into this slightly colorful header. Question is, what is this syntax? How do you write? How do you know that color is what represents the color of the text inside this h1 tag? How do you know background is the tag that you need to know and put to make the color of this div green? And the answer is you just Google it, and little you get via muscle memory. These are sort of important tags that you need to know: color, background. There are some important ones, and the other ones you just Google. Generally, there are some high level big ones that you need to know of. For example, color and background are the biggest ones. Other than that, you sometimes Google, sometimes after you've done this many times, you have some muscle memory and are able to remember what these tags are. But forgetting the tags for a moment, this is what the syntax looks like. Let's try to code this ourselves as well. Let me go to Visual Studio Code here and create an h1 tag, put hi there inside. Just this would do what? It would render, let's put them side by side. Let me open this index.html file. Just this gives me a plain vanilla hi there text. And if I want to add a color to it, what's the syntax? It is style equal to whatever I write inside these double quotes separated by semicolons are my various style tags. What am I adding? A color, let's say green, and don't need to have quotes here, and a background or background dash color, both work. Let's say aqua. If I do this and I refresh the page, background becomes aqua, color becomes green. If I make this red, color becomes red. So this is the syntax of writing it, and specifically the color and the background color are the two attributes, tags, whatever these are called, to change the background, change the color. Harkirat, are background color and background the same? Specifically for this case, yes. But background color, say you can only add a background If you use background tag, you can add images here, a bunch of other things. We're not worrying about that just yet, but you can use them interchangeably. Okay? This is the simple 2 tags that we just saw. Let's see a more exhaustive list of tags. Not really exhaustive. This is a really small list, but this list is good enough for what we need today. And as we go into the tailwind bits, some more advanced CSS through the cohort, we'll understand more of these tags. For now, this is a good list for you to know, enough to create the Zerodha landing page. Color and background color I discussed. Next is border dash radius. What is this? Let's say I have this h1 tag, right? And I want to add some border to it. What does border mean, Harkirat? Make this thing a little rounded. Throughout many websites, you will see this. Let's see if I can find something here that has a border. Can't really find. Yeah, if you look at this, if you really notice here, this is not really a straight rectangle. There is some border radius here. What does that mean? It's curved a little bit here. If I zoom this a little bit more, you'll be able to see it better. As you can see, this is curved a bit here. That is what border radius means. Okay. What should be the radius of the circle in case you want to make this slightly curved? And the answer is using the border dash radius tag. So if I use border radius and add 10 px here, px stands for pixels. If I refresh this page, you will see this has become slightly rounded here. So why is this used for? It just makes your website a little bit cleaner in various places. For example, if we did not have a radius here, this will look slightly ugly of a div. But say with the radius, even though it's a very small radius here, it's hard for the naked eye to tell. It does make your life a little bit, website a little bit prettier, which is why we use border radius. Hopefully that was clear. The next one is border. What is border, Harkirat? If you look at this div here, this effectively is a website, which means this probably is a div or a span, this thing that you see here. This box has a bunch of dotted lines here. What are these called? This is what's called the border. Adding, other than this color, adding a border to your div, which basically means a small line that encompasses your div. Let's try to look at the syntax, see what it looks like, and then go from there. So we have a few tags here. Let me add a new one called border dash border 2 pixel solid black. What have I done? With all my other attributes, I added another attribute called border. And what is the value? 2 pixels, which is the width of the border. Solid, which means it's a, I'll come to what solid means, and then black. If I refresh this, you will see a border added here. If I increase from 2 pixels to 10 pixels, the border becomes much more prominent. If I replace solid with dotted, you will see the border becomes dotted. Isn't this similar to what we saw here? A dotted border. So that's what this second attribute means. It can either be solid, dotted, a bunch of other variants. Usually 99% of the times you will have a very thin border. So maybe 1 px, it will be solid, and you'll have some color here that basically changes based on the use case. But this is the next third attribute that's good to know. Padding and margin, slightly important. Sort of not really an interview question in jobs, interview question during 11th, 12th classes. Okay, what is padding? What is margin? What is the difference between the two? So let's understand this. If you look at this, let's see. Yeah, look at this section here, or this div here. There is some space at the top, some space at the bottom, some space on the left, some space on the right. This is centrally aligned. That is one thing. You can do that with the center tag like we did in the past. But there is some space at the top, some space at the bottom. How do you add these spaces? If you look at my hi there right now, there is no real space on the left. It's really stacked here. No real space on the top, no real space on the bottom. How do I increase the space here, give it more breathing room? And the answer is margins and paddings. Let's understand these one by one. Let's start with padding. Let's say, similar to all of these here, I want to add some space at the top of the box, some space at the bottom of the box. For that, I can use padding. I'm going to add another attribute here called padding. And as you can see, the name itself says pad some space here. So if I add padding 10 pixels, refresh, there is some padding that's added here, some padding that's added here, some padding that's added here. What does pad mean? It means just pad the div with some extra space. Here, other than the syntax, I'd like to introduce one more thing, which is Chrome Developer Tools. In case you want to debug this, what does debugging mean? See how much space this is, how will it appear if I increase the space a little bit, decrease the space a little bit. You can do that like this also. Okay, increase this to 12 and then refresh the page and see how it looks, and then decrease it to 8 and then refresh the page. This is one way. What is a better way for you to debug it quickly? The answer is right click here. If you're on Chrome, If you're not, probably try this on Chrome. Right click, click on inspect here. This will open what are called Chrome developer tools, and as the name suggests, it's a developer tool, which means whoever is creating this website will use this tool. And what is this used for? As you can see, if I click on this H1 tag of mine, what do you see on the right? You see very nice representations ki haan, there is a border of 1 pixels, there is a padding of 8 pixels inside this padding right here, and I can also update the CSS from here. If I increase this padding, I can see how it looks like. So I can very quickly debug how my website would look if I increase or decrease the padding. This change goes away after I refresh the website, because the website is still always loaded from here. But just for testing while you're here, you can actually increase this padding, change the color from black to, I don't know, red, and the border became red, things like these. Nice way to debug things here. Next one, I want to discuss margins. Margins and padding have a very subtle difference between them. You can actually make out the difference if you look here. What does it say? It says, bro, ये जो H1 है, this H1 has a margin above it of 21.440 pixels, a margin below it of 21.44 pixels, a border, and then some padding inside. The padding, I've messed this up a bit, so let me just refresh. So if you look at it again, some margin, there is some margin on the top, some margin on the bottom. Where is it coming from? Forget about it. But there is some margin at the top. As you can see, if I hover over it, you see some yellow here, which basically tells you what that margin is. Then there is a border. If I hover over it, let me increase the border from 1 pixels to 10 pixels. If I hover over border, you will notice the color here of the border changes. It's basically telling you where this border is in the page. Then if I hover over padding, this is the space inside my div, inside the border, to give some breathing space inside the div. And then finally our main content. If I hover over this, I see the main content highlighted. So if this is padding, what is margin? Can you tell? If this breathing room that you're adding inside, if you want to add it inside the div, you use padding. If you want to add it outside the div, you use margins. If I can also add other attributes here directly, rather than adding them here. I can add margin 8 pixel here, but for quick testing, what I'll do is I'll just edit this, and you can do it on your side as well. I'm going to add a margin 50 pixels here. What happened? Outside my div, 50 pixels got added to the top, to the left, to the bottom, to the right. Okay? So what does margin do? It lets you put some breathing space outside the div. What does padding do? Lets you put some breathing space. If I increase this, breathing space inside the div. And what is the border? It's the thing between the pads and the margins. Okay? Color is done, background is done, border radius is done, border is done, padding is done, margin is done. Hopefully these are clear. Again, if I refresh the page, this goes away. But until I refresh, I can play along with this. I would urge you to play with this developer tools, get a little comfortable with this, because as time goes by, you spend a lot of time in this specific tool. There are a bunch of other things here we will go through as time goes by. The element tabs is the first one, and specifically this thing here is what we're looking for. If you right click and click on inspect, you might see this window at the top right of your screen as well. I can do that as well. You can actually change where this appears. It can appear here as well. Doesn't matter. I usually dock it at the bottom of my screen, so it has some breathing room. Okay? Let's go back to the slides. We understand all of these. What's left? Box dash shadow. This is very similar to border. It's basically lets you add some shadow to your div. So let me refresh this page. Let me remove the border that I had and save. What do you see? I see a div. There is no border. Let's add some box shadow here. Now the syntax here is going to be slightly different. Bear with me for 5 minutes. I'll teach, not really teach, but we'll see what this is. It has 4 things it expects, not just one. What did our border expect? Border expected 1 pixel, which is like the width, solid, which is what kind of a border it is, and the color. This guy expects 3 values, let's say 2 pixels, 10 pixels, 10 pixels, and 1 color, let's say black. Let me just write this. We will see what each of these mean, but just write this syntax and bear with me for 1 second. Save this and refresh. You see some shadow coming here, right? You'll see it's like it's sort of like a shadow. What does that mean? It is slightly diffused as time goes by. It sort of goes away. It's in a certain direction, versus borders are sort of static. But shadows are, you can actually tweak how a shadow looks, the direction in which the shadow is going, by tweaking these parameters. So let's go back to Chrome Developer Tools and let's try to play with this a little bit. Let me click here. Let me change this 2 pixels to 20 pixels. And as you can see, there is a lot of shadow that got added to the right. Let me make this 0 pixels, and there is no shadow on the right anymore. Let's make this minus 20 pixels, and you'll see the shadow goes to the left. So can you guess what the first attribute means? Basically means the direction in which the shadow should go. Should it be towards the right? Should it be towards the left? If I change this from minus 20 to 20, what happens? Or if I just keep, when it's minus 20, the shadow is going towards the left. If I make it 20, shadow is going towards the right. The other one also, if I make this 100 pixels, gets stretched down by a lot. If I make this 2 pixels, you can barely see it. And the last one, let's make this 50 pixels. You can see it's more diffused to the top, to the bottom as well. So you can guess what these do. Usually as a developer, you don't have to worry about it. You will be given a Figma file. You will copy box shadow from there onto your website, and you don't have to worry about all 3 of these or 4 of these attributes, but generally good to know. Get an intuition for it. You don't ever have to sort of design it and play with these. You will get a Figma file from where you will copy the CSS over onto your website. Okay? This was the last one I wanted to cover. This list is enough to build what we're building, which was the Zerodha landing page, at least when it comes to the styles. Okay? Take a breather, try to code a bit, try to play a bit with the CSS here. I'm going to move on, and I'm going to discuss the second part. In the beginning of the CSS slides, what did I say? Let's refresh this a little bit. I said it lets you add styles to your website, like colors, font sizes, background colors. We discussed a few of these attributes. I missed one important one, might be that you probably should know of, is font size. So let me just do a H1 font dash size 100 pixels. And can you guess what this specific attribute does that I just added? It increases the font size. If I make this 10 pixels, it makes the font size smaller. So this lets you describe the font size of the text inside this div. Okay? So these are the things that you can do using styles. What was the other thing that I told CSS lets you do? It lets you position elements on your page. What should appear on the left? What should appear on the right? What should appear in the middle? All these things. Center you can do via HTML as well, we discussed. But let's see how you do this via CSS. Centering a div, putting a div on the left, putting a div on the right, all these things. Okay? What are we building? How to position? What do we want to build? This, as you can see, there is some spacing here, which I'm hoping by now you can get. This is going to be some padding. The problem is that this padding is only on the left and not at the top. How will I add padding only on one side and not on the top is something we will discuss. But other than the padding, Zerodha is on the left. These buttons are on the right. How do we do this via CSS is what we'll discuss next. Yeah, let's get right into it. Right, let's read through some theory first and then understand how we can build something like this. Divs always take up all the space available horizontally. Spans take up only as much space as they need. Let's look at a practical example of this. If you look at this code here, I have 2 divs, one below the other. If you look at the page, one div takes the whole width, which is why the second div appears right below it. What happens if I convert this into a span? Then they appear right next to each other. So what do we learn from this? We learned that if you use a div, you probably cannot create something like this. They will all appear, one after the other. So to create something like this, do we need a span, or can we somehow, what does the question say here? Can you make divs only the space that they need? And if you can, how can you position them in the same line far away from each other? That's the question to answer. Let's first just stick to spans like we have right now, and just with spans try to create something like this. So if you go to the next slide, the question is, how do you position these? What do we want? We want some padding here. Let's say 100 pixels. And then we want a logo here, and we want a bunch of buttons here. First thing we need to do is create a top level div with the padding. So div style equal to, how much padding do we need? We probably need 100 pixels. But do we need above and below as well? No, we only need it on the left and on the right. How can I add padding only on the left and the right? I can use padding dash left, padding dash right, 100px. If I use this and then also close the div tag, what do you think this code will render? there is some padding on the left side. There is also some padding on the right. We don't see. How do I know there is a padding on the right? If I add a background color here, you will see padding left 100 pixels, padding right 100 pixels. Let's make this margin so that we can see this slightly better, because padding is, as you might remember, is inside the div and margin is outside the div. So if I refresh now, there is some margin added outside the div here. There is some margin added outside the div here. What should left side say? It should say Zerodha. What should right side say? It should have a bunch of buttons. Sign up is one of those buttons, let's say. Question is, how do I take this sign up to the right? Let's first do that and then we can add the other buttons. How do I take this sign up to the right of my window? The first dumb way is to use something called the float property. This is how things were done for the longest time. This is how I have positioned elements in various places. What is the float property or float attribute? Basically says that the span that you want floated to the right, you can add something like this, float right. What does this do? It takes the specific span that you want, puts it to the right of the specific parent div, which in our case, the red thing is the parent div. So sign up reaches the right side of our window. Seems like we're getting there. We're almost there. If I just remove background color, I have my Zerodha on the left, this on the right. This of course needs to be converted into an image. So I can also just replace this with, and what were the images that we had here? Logo.svg is the right one. So I can just write image source equal to logo.svg and width equal to, let's say 200. If I refresh, I see the Zerodha logo on the left. I see the button on the right. Getting there. We need bunch of more buttons, but this seems like we've almost made what we needed, right? I mean, there's a few things to fix. Padding needs to be slightly more if the width is longer, slightly less if the width is less, but we're getting there. But what is the problem? This is the ugly way of doing it. This is the dumb way of doing it. Positioning elements on the internet should be done by something called as the flex box. So new jargon I'm introducing here. Very important thing to know. The flex box. Anytime you want to position children right next to each other, children on the center of a screen, left of the screen, right of the screen, always use the flex box. Let's discuss what this is. A few slides ago I said, can you somehow have two divs that are right next to each other but lie in the same line? Is there a way to do it? The answer is yes. What is the way, Harkirat? By using this new attribute I'm going to introduce now called display. Now display can have various types. We are just interested in one right now. This is slightly harder, so bear with me for some time. If I write display flex here, it basically tells this parent div, okay bro, you are going to use flexbox. All your children need to lie in the same line. Somehow your children don't need to be one below the other, don't need to take all the width that they need, and they need to be positioned somehow, maybe all on the left, maybe all on the right, maybe some in the middle, like all in the middle, maybe some other way, but they need to be right next to each other. Just by adding this much, if I refresh my page, you will see hi there appears, hi there one appears right next to it, which means even though I have divs, they appear right next to each other. What happens if I remove the display flex attribute? They appear one below the other. What happens if I add it back? They appear right next to each other. So what is the first thing that Flexbox lets you do? It says that bhaiya, even if you put divs inside me, they will appear right next to each other. This is similar to, what is the other way to achieve this? Okay, I don't do this, but I have spans here. In that case also they appear right next to each other. But if you want to put more complicated elements here like divs, buttons, images, it's better to always have the parent be a flex box or parent have the display flex attribute. That way all the children will be peers. The question is, how do you position them? How do they appear on the left, on the right, all that jazz? So for this is like a standard list of attributes that you can use. The attribute is called justify content. So what does it say? Justify content. The content inside me, where should it be placed? So the children inside me, where should they be placed? Justify content. And it can have a few values. By default, the value is flex start. So by default, since that's the value, even if I remove this, it appears like this. Even if I add this back, it will appear like this. If this still looks the same, because the default value itself is Okay, justify content. All my children need to be at the start of the screen. Can you guess what happens if I replace flex start with flex end, as the name suggests? It says all my children need to be to the right of the screen. This is similar to float right, but this gives you so much power. This gives you, ठीक है भाई, both the children need to be on the left, both the children need to be on the right. Or what happens if I say center? Both the children need to be at the center of the screen. And if you look through this, there are a bunch of other things it lets you do. Flex start, flex end, center, space between. What does this mean? कि भैया, if there are 3 children, they need to be equally spaced. कि first person on the left, second person in the middle, third person on the right. What if there are 4 people? First person here, second person here, third person here, fourth person here. It lets you position elements equally in the div. So let's try that. Let's try space between. Refresh. What happened? First person on the left bit, second person on the right bit. What happens if I add a third child? First on the left, second in the middle. Sorry about that. And third on the right. What happens if I add a fourth child? You get the idea. They're equally spaced. When you are creating websites, you will have use cases like these. Okay, you know, they need to be equally spaced. They need to be on the left, on the right, in the middle. And Flexbox is the best way for you to position elements on your page. Are there other ways? Yes. There is something called absolute positioning. There were floats that we discussed in the last slide, but are they the right way to do it? No. What is the right way of positioning elements? It is Flexbox. Even on this page, if you see, other than these things on the left and the right, a lot of this is a very specific use case that you're seeing currently. This is slides.com website, where the way this might have been done most probably is absolute positioning. But for most websites, for example, if you go to my course selling website here, you notice all the children are equally spaced. There is, and the top bar, something is on the left, a few things are on the right. So this most probably uses Flexbox. We can actually confirm that by clicking inspect, going on the website, looking at the nav bar, reaching the nav bar somehow. Don't worry if you don't understand this part. This is slightly just trying to show you. This also might not be using Flexbox. I have not written this code, but let's see if it is. There you go, nav. And does it have a flex property? Flex wrap display div. There you go. What is this top level div saying? It says display flex, justify content, space between. What happens if I make this center? Nothing changed. Space. See, nav div a and this a. Okay, this takes the full width, that's why. Don't worry about it. But you get the idea. Hopefully you get the idea. Okay, huh? Even this div, the reason this is on the left and this div is on the right is why? Because even this uses the Flexbox displays flex. Even though this div has a button and an A and a div inside, still they are appearing next to each other, even though divs usually take up the whole space. Why? Because this parent div has a display set to flex. How they are internally positioned is something else. This A tag basically takes up the complete width, which is why, you know, even though this has, I change this space around or changes to whatever, you don't see any change here. The reason for that is this first one takes up all the width. So it's basically similar to you having a normal just display flex, not having any specific, any one of these properties there, because the first one takes up the full width and the second and the third one just appear on the right side. So that's maybe a third way to position something on the left, something on the right. Okay, your first child takes as much space as you can, and the second child just gets what it gets at the very end. Okay? Don't worry too much about this part if you did not get it. Let's go back to our use case. What was our use case? Okay, bhaiya, we want to Zerodha to appear here and a bunch of buttons to appear here. Let's start with the first one. Okay, bhaiya, let's put Zerodha on the left. So image source equal to logo.svg and width equal to 200. And then let's put a div that says sign up. Refresh. I see Zerodha on the left. I see sign up on the right. Why? Because justify content is what? Space between. What was space between? Okay, bhaiya, if there are 2 children, space between is this one right here. All the children are equally spaced. This works if we have a single sign up button. Okay, bhaiya, Zerodha on the left, sign up on the right, we are good. The only thing I'm missing now is the margin. So let me add a margin left to the parent div, 100 px, margin right to the parent div, 100 px. If I refresh, some margin here, some margin here, this button here, this button here. Things look decent. What is the problem? We need a few buttons here, not just sign up. What does the Zerodha landing page look like? It looks something like this. Zerodha on the left, sign up, about, products, a bunch of things on the right. This guy works until I have a single sign up. But can you guess what happens if I add, let's say, about us here? Will this just work? Will about us appear right next to it? Or will something else happen? Take a breather, maybe read through this, read through what space between does, and try to guess. If I add this third child, will it work correctly or not? Take a pause, feel free to pause the video, I'm going to proceed. I refresh, does not appear correctly. They all are equally spaced. We don't want that. We want one child on the left, other child on the right, and the second child needs to have all these elements right next to each other. So how can you fix that? Think about it a little bit. If you don't understand, it's totally fine. I will explain it, but try to think about it and what can you do here? Can you do something here so that Zerodha is on the left and all the buttons are on the right, and then there is space between them because we have used the space between justify content attribute. We need only two children somehow. We need this on the left, we need the second child on the right, and the second child needs to have a bunch of elements inside. Can we do something fancy here? Let me do something here. Feel free to pause if you want to try it yourself. What I'm going to do is, I'm going to say, bhaiya, the second child, doesn't matter if it has 2, has 3, I'm going to put all of these inside a single parent div. What did I do? I said, bhaiya, the parent div only has 2 children. The first child is this, the second child is this div. Now the second child has a bunch of children in itself, that is fine. But how many children does this guy have? 2. And what does Flexbox say? Okay, bhaiya, if you have 3 children and you use space between, first child will be here, second will be here, third will be here. If you have 2 children, first child will be here, second child will be here. How many children does our parent div have? If I collapse this, it has only 2 children. So where will the first child come? On the left of the screen. Where will the second child come? On the right of the screen. What is the problem? The problem is they appear one below the other. How can you fix it? Dumb way to fix it. Make them all spans. Looks good. Seems like it's doing what it's supposed to do. These 3 appear on the left. This appear on the right. This appears on the left. I just made all of these spans. But can you do something else? What if I want these to be divs? What is the problem right now if they are divs? The problem is they appear one below the other. How can you fix it? The parent of these, if it has display flex, then they will appear right next to each other. Flexbox only works for the immediate children. Okay, bhai, if this has display flex, then this child and this child are the 2 children that will be placed right next to each other. But this div ke children have their own flexbox. If I add display flex here, then can you guess what will happen? They appear right next to each other, even though this is a div. Okay? So can you see a flex inside a flex? Can you see how that can get confusing? Take a breather, take a pause. Try to read through this. Maybe don't worry too much about this. Can you understand at least this part? Okay, bhaiya, logo on the left, hidden on the right, because I said display flex, so both of them appear right next to each other. And I said justify content space between. Okay, bhaiya, how the children need to be equally spaced. Since there are only 2 children, the only way they can be equally sort of spaced or are they'll be on the extreme ends of the div, which is why this sort of works for us. What was the problem? Okay, there need to be 3 here. What was the one way of doing it? Okay, bhaiya, I'll just add the 3 buttons here. The problem was all 4 of them are equally spaced then. We don't want that. We want Zerodha on the left. We want all 3 on the right. So what was the solution that was proposed? Solution proposed was, okay, bhaiya, this will still have 2 children. This is the first child and the second child is this complex big div. And what will the flex box of the parent div say? It will say, okay, bhaiya, my first child on the left, my second child on the right. And then just to make sure they don't appear one below the other on the second side, I said style equal to display flex on this inner div as well. So this inner div as well. What is this inner div? Let's give it a background color. Let's remove this display effects for now. On the parent div, we definitely need these, so let's remove that as well. Let's keep it slightly simple. This is what it looks like. What is this div? Let's add this a background red here. If I refresh, this div is what? This thing right here. Forget about this. Let me remove it. Forget about this. Let me remove it. If I had just this much code, what would it render? It renders this. If I want them to appear one next to each other, what can I do? I can add display flex here. That makes them appear one next to each other. If we understand how this thing works independently, can I just extrapolate that to when this div is still the same? It just has been positioned by its parent over here. The parent positioned it over here. Can this guy now make sure that all these three children appear one next to the other? How can it do it? The answer is this inner div will be like display flex. And that way, the inner div elements are also appearing one next to the other. And the outer div is like, bro, both of my children are also going to appear one next to the other and they'll be equally spaced. Okay? Hopefully, this is clear how you can use Flexbox. Let me remove the background color now. To position elements correctly. And I need a display effects there, my bad. To position elements correctly, so that we're sort of getting close to the landing page that we can create. One child here, another child here. Hopefully that was straightforward. If not, Flexbox is slightly hard. We will rediscuss this when we reach Tailwind, but good to know how you can use raw CSS to position elements the right way. Flexbox is the right way. What are the wrong ways? The things that we discussed a slide ago, which was the float property. And there is another thing, as I said, something called absolute positioning, which can also let you achieve something like this. But what is the best way? It is Flexbox. Feel free to read through what is space around, what is space evenly, what is the difference between these two. And usually all 5 of these justify contents are enough for you to create any website and position your elements various places. Okay? This is the sort of last thing you need to be able to build our Zerodha landing page. Now, what was our Zerodha landing page? This thing right here. Can we now create this? Let's try to create it. I'm going to write some code. Would urge you to try to create this yourself. I've already created the most difficult bit here, which is this top bar. Everything else is actually pretty straightforward. We just need to, add some styles here, add a box shadow here, add some margins here, make the button blue in color, things like these. So I'm going to do is, would urge you to try it yourself first. If you're not able to do it, feel free to come back to this video and do it with me. Okay? Let's get into it. First thing I'm going to do is make sure the top bar is complete. What does the top bar look like? Zerodha on the left. Let's make this bigger. Zerodha on the left, bunch of buttons on the right, some padding here, and some shadow in the middle. The first thing I'll do is add some padding. Padding on the top, padding on the bottom. So let's me do that here. The parent div, I'm going to add padding left. Oh, I did already add that. Oh, padding top, maybe 50 px. Padding bottom, 50 px. Refresh. 50 is a little too much. 20 px. Looks okay. You can actually go to the Zerodha's page and steal their styles as well. Every website that you see, their HTML, CSS and JavaScript reaches your browser. You can actually read it completely. So if I right click here, click on inspect, I can actually go to the div and see, okay, what is their padding here? Let's see. href. The other one. Needs to be an easy way to do this. Let's see. There you go. What is the padding? 20 on the top, 20 on the bottom, 20 on the left, 20 on the right. So when we get here, we know how much padding this box needs, but what is the global padding? If I hover over this, you will see 20 at the top, 20 at the bottom, right here. So let me add that to my Zerodha logo as well. I already have that. So we're sort of getting there. The width of this is also slightly lesser. So let me decrease the size to maybe 170. Refresh. Sort of getting there. Cool. These, each one of these has what? It has padding 20 px that we just saw. If we go here to the original Zerodha page, if I click on the hover over this, what did we see? Padding 20px. You can also see it here. If I hover over it, you will see 20 pixels on all sides. So let me add that to each one of these. Let me also name these correctly. So there is sign up about product pricing and support. Sign up about product pricing and support. I have these. Let me add some styles to each one of these. I'm going to just copy paste this to all 4 of our divs, or all 5 of our divs. So all 5 of them have some padding now. Let me refresh our page. Looks pretty close. It's a little pixelated. Image. Oh yeah. Not gonna fix this. It's also a little too big, if I'm being honest. That's what she said. Let's see. Div padding 20 pixels. My parent added some margin as well, so let me remove that. Padding. Let me remove. I also added it to the parent. I also added it to these children, which is why big blew up very big. So let me remove the padding from the parent div, and now let me refresh. Looks closer to what we want. This is still pretty big, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to restrict the height of this guy as well. This is probably not the right way to do it, if I'm being honest. There's a better way of doing this, but okay, let's restrict the height of our Zerodha logo. It's becoming too big now. Let's make it 30 pixels, and let's add a top padding to it. All right, slowly getting there. Maybe it's a little bit bigger still, so let's make it 150. Yeah, that looks pretty close to what we want. Maybe Zerodha on the left, bunch of buttons on the right, some padding here, some padding here. What is the next thing that's missing? If I go to these buttons, one, if I hover over them, the mouse pointer changes from a simple cursor to like this hand thingy. So that's one thing we need to change. Secondly, the color of these guys is slightly different, so I can also steal the color if I want. If I go here, you will see what is the color. There you go. Hashtag 666, which is just one way of representing numbers. You can just write something like, let's see, color gray, and that makes this gray. But if you want a specific tint of a color, you can use what are called these hex codes, and that will also give you the same thing. But these are like much more precise and let you get every variant of a color that exists in the world. If I write gray, it may not be exactly what the designer wants me. Usually, whenever the designer is giving you these colors, they will give you the hex code. Refresh. I need to add this in all of them. So let me again copy paste it across. For those of you who don't know, I'm using the Command D on my keyboard to select all of these and then pasting them together. Now I have 5 signups. Now if I go here, refresh, you can see there is an issue because I did not put it here. Now if I see, my 5 of them look okay. On a smaller screen, they're still messed up, and that's because our website isn't responsive at all at the moment. If you go to the Zerodha website and you make it smaller, what happens? This thing collapses into the top hamburger icon. We're not worrying about that yet. Very simple. On a bigger screen, this looks pretty close to what we want right here. What is the last thing that's left? A bottom box shadow, which I'm just going to copy from there. So right click, inspect, go to their top nav and copy the box shadow from their navbar to my own website. And that way we'll see the exact same thing. Let's see, box shadow, this thing, refresh, and I see a box shadow as well. The only problem is, now here comes a very good question for you. Okay, the box shadow ends here. How can I fix it? I added something added, right? A margin of padding, something added of 100 pixels here, 100 pixels here. The problem is my shadow ends right here. What did I miss and how can you fix it? Take a pause here. What is the answer? The answer is the difference between padding and margin. Do I want this space outside the div or inside the div? Right now, what have I used? I've used margin. What does margin say? Ki bhaiya, outside my div, I will add 100 pixels. What do we want? Inside the div. So I'll just replace this margin with a padding and then we'll be sorted. So our top bar appears pretty good. We have a very similar to the Zerodha top bar, our own top bar. Let me just, the only thing that's still a little weird here is the image. So let me make it slightly smaller, 120 and maybe 25, maybe 20. Yeah, that looks better. And then let's make this 20 as well. Yeah, it's pretty good. Yeah, so we have the top bar that's ready. What is left now? Now it's the easy bits only. This was the most difficult bit. Positioning elements is the most difficult thing usually. Image tag, that pretty much remains the same. Okay, bhaiya, after all of these, I need some space. So I can add a break, or I will ask you this very soon. Okay, let me just finish this. Image source equal to, what was the name of our image? It was called photo.png. So I'm going to do photo.png here. I'm going to refresh. Was it photo.png or was it something else? It was photo.png. And if I refresh this, I do see it. What is the problem? It is aligned very weirdly. Can you guess what is wrong? Can you guess what is wrong? If this was a live class, it would have been a live bounty. Why is this appearing so weirdly? Why is there Zerudha? Then these 5 buttons. And this image right next to it. Why is this image not appearing below it? Can you guess? Because where did I put this image? I said, bro, the top level div, which has display flex, has 3 children now. First child, which is an image, this logo right here. Second child, which is this div. And the third child, I ended up adding here as well. Where do I want to, should I add it? Below it. If I do that, then my image appears correctly. Okay? Zerodha, this thing, and then the image right here. How do I put the image in the center? What is the dumb way of doing it? The center tag. That works. Image appears in the center of the screen. What is the better way of doing it? We have just learned this. Can you guess? Div style equal to display flex justify content center. What did we say? All children appear on the center of the screen. How many children does it have? It has just one child, which is why it appears on the center of the screen. This is much better than using the center tag. Both do the exact same thing. Using the center tag or using this is the same thing, but this is depreciated. So never use the center tag. Always use div with display flex and justify content center to position things in the center of your screen horizontally. Okay, this is done. What is left? Up to kuch bhi nahi. 1, 2 and 3. This and this are fairly straightforward to add. I can put a break, maybe put 2 breaks here, or I can put a break here. I put a break before, or I can just add a padding dash top of whatever 20 px to this. Both do the same, almost a similar thing. Basically, both add some space above this image. I can either add a padding top to this image, which means there will be some padding here, or I can just use the break tag to add some space here. Usually, this is the right way of doing it. Add some padding. If I refresh, looks right. If I increase this to 40 pixels, what will happen? It moves even further. So it depends on how you want it to position. 20 looked okay. All right. I'm going to introduce the next div. Again, I'm going to say padding top 40 pixels. And then I'm going to write H1 invest in everything. If I refresh, I see invest in everything. What is the problem? Not centrally aligned. How do you align it centrally? Now we have done this a few times. Display flex justify content center. Refresh, this appears in the center. What was the next thing I needed to add right below it? Online platform for whatever. Let me copy this. Let me go here. Everything looks the same, 20 pixels above, and copy this and make this maybe H3. And now if I refresh, I see this became a little too small, so I'm going to make it H2. Refresh. Getting there, getting pretty close to what we want here. A few things I can see is there's a little too much space here, so let me decrease the margins, 30, and then maybe 12 pixels. Refresh, maybe even smaller. Let's make this 20. So, all right. The last thing that's left is adding a button. So the problem with the button is this is a very naked, dumb, ugly looking government office button. This is nowhere close to this. And it's usually very hard to style these buttons. This was the native HTML button, because when HTML was written, people were like, everyone will use websites like this. Who will create fancy UIs like this? And today, every website is extremely fancy. So the button sort of tag is usually very flawed in HTML. So usually, anytime you see a button, especially a fancy button like this, under the hood, it is most probably using a div only. So if I go here, I can actually convert this into a div. The only problem is, the biggest thing that a button gives you is like, how do you think something is a button? If I hover over it, my mouse pointer changes, and sometimes the color changes as well. We will not discuss the color change in this video, but the mouse pointer change we will discuss. How can I say, bhaiya, a div, we needed this at the top as well, right? If I hover over this, what happens? The mouse pointer changes. On our website, it doesn't yet change. How do I do this? I'll do this here as well, and for the div that we're introducing at the end as well. The answer for this is, let's see. All of these need to have cursor, pointer. Everything is available in CSS. What does it say? Okay, my cursor, when someone hovers over it, should be a pointer. So if I copy this, I can actually paste this on all 5. So let me remove it from here. Let me select this div style. Let me press Command D or Control D, depending on whether you're Windows or a Mac or a Linux user. And what does it do? It selects all 5 of these as I click Command D, Command D, Command D, Command D 5 times. Next, I'm going to take these cursors to the end, press space, and then paste cursor pointer. What does it do? In a single sort of paste, it lets me paste it on all 5 places. Save, refresh, and if I hover over it now, they become, my mouse pointer changes, which is exactly what we needed. What is the last thing? Making this sign up button pretty. Can you try it yourself? You know everything now. This is a div. What do you need to do? You need to add a background color to it. You need to make sure if you hover over it, the thing changes. You need to add some border radius to it. And you need to add some padding on the left, on the right, on the bottom, on the right. You need to make the font size slightly bigger. Can you try this yourself? A hint is, feel free to right click, inspect, and look at the CSS for this sign up now button. So they don't use a div, they use an A tag, which is fine. Don't worry about why they use an A tag. You can use a div as well, it is fine. If you click on it, you can see there is some margin at the top. You can see there is a background color that you can copy from here. Color, border radius. You can just copy everything over if you want. You can always copy someone's website. All the CSS is usually available, which is what I'm going to do. I would urge you to try it yourself. Okay? The last thing that's left in this page is, not the last thing, there are a few other things like the font is slightly leaner, we'll get to it. But before that, let me create the button at the bottom of the screen. Style equal to background color is there you go. This, and then there is some padding at the top, padding on the right. I can actually just copy it from here. If I go here, click on it, what does it say? Padding at the top is 10, padding at the left and the right is 30. So I'm going to introduce something new here. I can either do this, padding top 10 pixels, padding bottom 10 pixels, padding left 10 pixels, padding right 10 pixels. But this is like very big, very verbose. I had to write 4 different things. Can you figure out a way, and this is an assignment now, can you figure out a way to do this in a slightly leaner fashion? By leaner, I mean in less number of words. Try to ChatGPT it, I'm sure it'll give you an answer. There's a cleaner way to add paddings like these. If you know, okay, the top and the bottom padding is the same as to each other, and the left and the right padding is the same to each other. If you already know this, you can actually make this slightly cleaner, but I'm going to leave that as an assignment. Going to save this, going to also add a div outside it, that is display flex and justify content center, so that our button div is in the center of the screen. If this feels jarring still, feel free to replace this with just a center tag for now. It will still work. You can eventually, when you get comfortable with Flexbox, use the other thing that I just showed. All right, refresh the page. Very big button I see. This is not something we want, which is probably another reason why you don't want. You can either convert this into a span, that works as well. That makes it a simpler button. Or you can just do the other thing that I was showing, which was use a flex box here to center the div. In that case also it will work. Let me do that only. So this, I'm going to use this. Feel free to use the center tag. If you use the center tag, make sure this is the span. And lastly, this looks like I've flipped these. So bottom left, I think it's 10 and 30, and I've probably made it. Oh no, I made everything 10, my bad. Left and right are what? They're actually 30. What is the color? Is it black in color? No, it is white. Refresh. Looks pretty close to what we want here. Still a lot to do. Border radius 3, and the font size is also maybe 20 pixels. Refresh. Getting pretty close to this. Sign up now. Sign up now. Sign up now. What should the cursor become? Pointer. Refresh. Seems to work. Seems like my Zerodha landing page is getting very close to the main Zerodha landing page. This image is slightly smaller. Let me add that. Let me make the image. Where is it? There you go. Width equal to maybe 800. Yeah, there you go. Does it look pretty close to this? Some more space at the top. Make this maybe 1000. Padding top is going to be 40 here. If I refresh, I see this page, which is the page that I made, and the Zerodha page are getting very close to each other. Some spacing issues, but other than that, pretty close. The top bar they have a lot of space here. Mine does not. You can fix it very easily. The one last thing I want to introduce here is font weight, which is, as you can see, this is like slightly leaner, slightly not as bold as these. So you can use something called font weight to achieve that. If I go here to my H2, I can be like style equal to font weight 400. And if I refresh, notice on this thing, notice on, I hope you notice on this one, this became slightly leaner. If I make this 600, it will become slightly bolder. So I'm going to keep it at 400 here. This looks right. Maybe invest in crypto also is a little too bold, so I'm going to make it 500 over here. Refresh. Does our page look pretty close to what we want here? Probably needs to be a little bit bigger as well. So I'm just adding pixelation perfections here. You don't need to. This is not really a production project we are working with right now, but you get the idea. Okay, and this is how you can incrementally, oops, did the wrong thing. This is how you can incrementally build your page. There you go. The space is a little too much here, so let me do maybe 2 pixels here. There you go. All right. I'm just adding spacing here, so don't even worry about it. Just trying to space it better. But other than that, even if you don't space it well, you can play with it. We have our Zerodha landing page. Does it look pretty close to this landing page? It looks pretty close. You can add more pixel perfections here. For example, I'm going to change this padding at the top from 100 to 200. And let's see. This and this look pretty close. There is a hamburger icon. If I click on the hamburger icon, something opens. If I hover over this, the color changes. If you hover over mine, the color does not change. Still a few things to do. Some of these things can only be achieved via JavaScript. Some of these things can be achieved via CSS. But this is a great checkpoint to understanding all the styling attributes, which was basically these things right here, and Flexbox, which was this thing right here. How can you position elements? What did we use? What all did we use here? The thing that we used most often was justify content center to center this and this and this and this. What was the other thing we used? We used justify content space between to space them across the page. Okay? Now we have a simple landing page that's available, can be pushed out to production, and other people can see. We understand, hopefully, enough CSS. That's great to kick us off. From here, we need to get into the meat of what we need to discuss, which is JavaScript, which is we will be spending most of our time until we reach a little bit of React and Tailwind. Until then, we don't have to worry at all about HTML and CSS. But a good thing to know, generally, you have like a few days to basically revise these videos. I would urge you to do it. And then in the next video onwards, let's get into some basic JavaScript.